Virgin, there's something no one explained to you about that estrangement, about that person who seems to avoid you, who acts as if you were something they silently decided to leave behind. You tried to understand. You revisited conversations. You searched for the exact moment when everything changed. And at some point in that inner process, because Virgos always process things internally, with a precision that sometimes hurts more than the estrangement itself, you came to a conclusion that seemed irrefutable. It's all my fault. But that conclusion could be the biggest trap of your life. There's something Virgo does in an absolutely automatic, almost reflexive way that works against her in moments like this. She finds the flaw in systems, in situations, in the people around her, and especially in herself. When someone creates distance, Virgo opens her internal archive and starts cataloging. What did I say? What did I fail to say? Where was I too cold? Where should I have been different? But when the wrong wound is pointed at, she doesn't serve as an instrument. She becomes a knife that you yourself wield with precision. The problem is that this process happens silently. No one sees it. No one knows that Virgo is there, reviewing, analyzing, building theories about itself with the same seriousness it would use to solve any other complex problem. And this invisibility makes the conclusion that emerges from this process seem even more solid, because it was built entirely on its own, without interference. It seems true because it encountered no obstacle, because what seems like rejection is rarely rejection, and what seems like a definitive exit is sometimes the move of someone who feels too much and simply doesn't have the emotional structure to deal with what they feel when they're around you. Virgo has a presence that leaves a mark. It's not something she chooses to activate. It simply exists. It's a field of perception so attuned, so real, that being near a Virgo is to be seen in a way that most people have never experienced. And not everyone knows what to do when they are genuinely seen. Imagine someone who has spent years telling themselves a story about who they are, a manageable, safe version with well-defined boundaries. And suddenly someone appears who sees beyond those boundaries. Someone who isn't impressed by the facade, who perceives what lies beneath without you asking permission. That's not comfort, that's exposure. And the natural response for someone who isn't ready to truly see themselves is to distance themselves from the source that allows that gaze. Not because it's unbearable, because what it reveals about you is, when that person starts to distance themselves, they're not saying you don't matter. They're saying, in a way they probably can't articulate themselves, that you matter more than they know how to manage right now. There's a huge difference between those two experiences. And feeling that difference changes everything. But here's where the story gets complicated. Because Virgo, with all her intelligence, with her ability to read patterns, has a blind spot precisely where she most needs to see within herself. She sees everything around her with a clarity that is sometimes disturbing. She notices inconsistencies that no one has verbalized. And when pain arrives, instead of using that same self-awareness, she turns the magnifying glass inward and begins to operate as if trying to fix something delicate with her own still open hands. And while Virgo is there, inside that labyrinth of analysis she herself constructed, the other person, the one who supposedly decided to leave for good, it still emerges. It is still present even when it tries to be absent. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose. When you're in the middle of a dynamic like this, trying to decipher why someone who should have disappeared hasn't truly disappeared yet, and at the same time trying to understand what it is within you that causes this, what you need most isn't techniques or strategies. It's clarity about who you are and what your presence truly does to people. This book explores the inner architecture of Virgo, that part you've never been able to name but have always felt, the gift of perceiving the invisible, the tendency to blame yourself for what wasn't your fault, and the field of influence you carry, which doesn't deactivate by the other person's decision because it never depended on their permission. You are now at the exact point in this video where the discomfort is still alive. You've recognized something within yourself and are still processing it. This is the moment, not later. Not when that feeling cools down and you go back to autopilot. Now, while you're still inside it, while you still have the open question, This book won't give you a ready-made answer. It will give you the perspective that allows you to find the right answer yourself. The link is in the first pinned comment. But be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. In the comments, tell me, have you ever noticed that even when someone tries to avoid you, there's something in that dynamic that never quite closes, as if the other person can't really end the distancing? How was it to recognize this in yourself? Because what's happening isn't what you thought it was, and the sooner Virgo stops operating in the dark, the faster the real vision arrives. The other person hasn't disappeared. They remain present in ways she herself can't explain. The name that pops into her head for no reason, the memory that appears at the most inopportune moment, the dream that shouldn't have happened, the feeling of wanting to check and resisting and checking again. This isn't obsession on her part. It's the clearest sign that that connection has a weight that the decision to distance herself couldn't bear. And here begins the part that changes everything. There's a difference between trying to eradicate something that has no roots and trying to eradicate something that's been planted deep. What has no roots fades easily. It loses its shape quickly. What has roots doesn't fade. It bends in the wind. It loses leaves at certain times. It seems dead on the outside at times, but the root is still there, and roots that are there grow back. What that person is trying to do is uproot something that has already been planted, and the problem, the beautiful and disturbing problem, is that they don't fully realize it. They think they're just moving away, that they're just creating space, that they're just protecting themselves from something that scares them. But they're trying to uproot something that isn't allowed to be uprooted. Virgo, who senses patterns before anyone else, feels this. Even when analyzing the situation from the wrong perspective, even when the conclusion reached is that it's my fault, at some deeper level, the one that doesn't obey what the mind has constructed as an explanation, she knows that the story isn't over, that the last chapter hasn't been written yet. And knowing this without being able to prove it, without being able to articulate it in a way that seems reasonable, is one of the most uncomfortable places Virgo can inhabit. Because Virgo likes proof, likes data, likes being able to point and say, here is the evidence. And when the most important evidence is a feeling that logic doesn't support, Virgo goes into crisis with itself, but there is a force that doesn't wait for Virgo to solve the equation. That doesn't wait for your approval to act. That is already in motion while you are still trying to understand what happened. This force doesn't have an easily articulable name. Some people call it destiny, others God, others universal order. The name doesn't matter as much as the experience of it, because anyone who has lived through a coincidence too impossible to be a coincidence knows exactly what I'm talking about. You know that feeling that something much bigger than any individual will is moving the pieces in a way that none of the parties planned. And when this force acts upon a real connection, upon something that was destined not by the whim of momentary emotion, but by a deeper alignment, it does not accept interruption, not because it is cruel or insensitive to people's choices, but because there is a difference between what people want in the moment and what is written at the deepest level of who they are. The other person wants to distance themselves, but they can't, because what they want right now and what's being built for them are going in opposite directions. And when these two forces clash, the deeper one wins, not with violence, with persistence, with coincidences, with signs that arrive just when they've decided to stop thinking about you, with encounters that made no statistical sense, with the feeling of you being in situations that don't include you at all. This is God forbidding, not as a poetic metaphor, as the actual mechanics of how true connections work. And while this mechanism operates, while this force silently moves the pieces, what is Virgo doing? Ideally, she is learning not to interfere with the process, not to try to accelerate what needs its own time, not to use her analysis to conclude that it's over when in fact it's only at a point of tension that will precede a turning point she can't yet see from where she is. This force that doesn't ask permission, it's also at work in your life right now. And while you're still grappling with this issue, I want to introduce you to something that directly addresses what Virgo needs most at this point. Clarity about the difference between what they can control and what they need to learn to trust. The digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, explores exactly this tension between the analysis Virgo uses as a shield and the surrender the divine demands when the human plan is simply not enough. If you recognized yourself at any point in what has been narrated so far, this book was written for the exact place where you are right now. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. And there's a paradox that needs to be mentioned here. Because the more someone tries not to think about Virgo, the more it appears. It's not magic. It's a mechanism that psychology knows well, but it still has something mystical about it. Think of someone who made the firm decision to erase a presence, who built a new routine, who filled the space with other things, other conversations, other stimuli. And yet, even with all this conscious effort of replacement, they feel that presence in situations that have no connection whatsoever with it, in the perfume of a different person, in a detail someone mentioned in a casual conversation, in a phrase that no one else would say in that specific way, in the silence of a moment that was meant to be complete and simply isn't. This happens because Virgo doesn't just pass through people's lives, it establishes a frequency, and a frequency can't be uninstalled at will. There's no reset button. It continues to operate even after physical or verbal contact has ended, like a sound that continues to reverberate in a room long after the original note has stopped playing. And the other person is experiencing exactly that. They are trying to stop the reverberation with willpower, and they are not succeeding, because what Virgo left in them is not a thought that can be controlled. It is a layer of perception that has been opened, and what has been opened does not close simply because you decide it should close. This isn't a sign of weakness on the other person's part. In fact, it's the biggest sign that what happened there was real. What's superficial is easily forgotten. What goes deep remains. And Virgo always goes deep, even unintentionally, even when they're just being themselves, even when they don't realize how deeply they've touched someone. So when you see that person showing up in ways that don't make sense, when you realize they can't simply end it even when they try, that's not a sign of their fragility. It's a sign of the depth of what you two touched upon. And data doesn't lie. You might ask, but then why is she still trying to distance herself if she's not succeeding? Because sometimes people are more afraid of exactly what they need to be afraid of. And fear isn't logical. It doesn't respect what would be best. It simply operates, trying to maintain the control it feels it will lose if it stops running away. But what fear fails to realize is that Virgo is not the danger. Virgo is precisely what could bring clarity to what the other person is trying not to see in themselves. The escape is not from Virgo, it's from the mirror that Virgo represents. And mirrors don't disappear just because you turn your back on them. This becomes increasingly clear to the other person, and as it does, as they realize that distance isn't producing the relief they expected, something begins to take shape beneath the surface. Something silent, something that doesn't announce its arrival, something that simply builds while no one is paying attention. There is one thing that silence does that no movement can. It reveals what is essential. When all the external noise stops, when the other person is absent, when the dynamics are paused, when the movement on the surface quiets down, what remains is what is real. And Virgo, which sometimes gets lost in excessive analysis, excessive questioning, excessive reviewing of what has already happened, has in silence an opportunity it rarely allows itself, that of simply being. Do not build, do not analyze, do not catalogue, simply be. And it is in this space, the one that seems empty but is full, that the most important things happen in Virgo, that she discovers what she truly wants, that she realizes which analyses were tools and which were ways of protecting herself from what she didn't want to feel, that she stops confusing herself with the questions and begins to recognize the answers that were already there, waiting for her to be quiet enough to hear them. The other person is trying to create distance, but what that distance did unintentionally, without any planning, was create the silence that Virgo needed. Not the silence of abandonment, the silence of construction, the silence in which the beams are being positioned, in which each element is being placed in the exact spot where it will support the weight of what comes next, in which what will emerge will have a solidity that only the right process could provide. Virgo wasn't made for superficiality. It never was. And the connections that truly matter to her, the ones with the weight she needs, the depth she demands without realizing she demands it, those connections don't come easily. They come after a process, after a purification, after a moment when it seemed like she was going to crumble and she didn't. What is being built in silence right now is exactly that. The version of you that will be ready to receive what is yours when the right moment arrives, clearer about what you want, firmer about what you won't accept, more whole, less willing to shrink to fit into the space that someone else has defined as enough for you. And this internal process, this invisible work that Virgo does while seemingly just waiting, is what will determine what comes next. Not the other person's decision, not the pace they set or fail to set. What you are becoming now within this silence is the most decisive factor in what manifests in your life next. God doesn't allow it, but He also doesn't do the inner work for you. He opens the space, you build within it, and Virgo, when she stops sabotaging herself with self-analysis, is perhaps the soul most capable of building within a silent space, because she has always known how to work with precision on what no one else can see. This inner work, what Virgo builds in silence while waiting for what is theirs, is exactly what the digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, illuminates with a clarity you rarely find gathered in one place, not as consolation, as a practical map, a map that speaks to the specific nature of Virgo, its precision, its discernment, its ability to build internal structures that support reality, and how these qualities, when aligned with what has been designated for it, become the most concrete strength it possesses. If you are in the midst of this silent building process, this book has what you need to avoid building in the dark. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. And what about that person who tried to avoid you? There is one thing the universe understands with a clarity that human will cannot grasp. What is real does not disappear. What has been woven with depth does not dissolve because someone decided it should dissolve. The tide may recede. It may seem that the water has gone, that the shore has dried up, that all movement has vanished completely, but the tide always returns, always, to the same shore, because that is where it belongs. Virgo doesn't need to chase, never has. What is theirs has a specific frequency, one that cannot be replicated by anything else, replaced by another presence, filled by another choice. And when the other person tries to fill that space with alternatives, with distances, with well-organized silences, at some point they realize that the space doesn't fill up, that the frequency doesn't change, that what they tried to erase remains exactly what it was before the attempt to erase it. Because Virgo remains Virgo, necessary, profound, incapable of being superficial when being real, impossible to erase when it has been genuine. And what was genuine in you, what you truly touched in that connection that was not yours to lose, God doesn't let it happen. That's the simple truth this entire video was building for you to hear right now. Not as vague hope from someone who has nothing more concrete to say, not as last-minute consolation, as a real structure, as the mechanism that operates beneath everything that seems to be against you at this moment. You've come this far carrying something heavy, carrying the unanswered question, the analysis that didn't add up, the feeling that maybe you were the problem with everything. But you weren't. You never were. What you are, your depth, your precision, your ability to perceive the invisible and to be a real presence in the world, that is not what repels what is good, it is what attracts what is genuine. And what is genuine when it comes doesn't go away. It simply can't. Virgo was made to perceive what others don't, to feel what others can't name, to build within herself and around herself structures that support the weight of what is real. And the universe, which knows precisely what she is, will not waste that. What is yours will find its way, not because you calculated every move perfectly, not because you were patient enough or perfect enough or different enough, but because God doesn't let what is real simply get lost along the way. And Virgo, with all the depth it carries, with all the invisible weight of what it feels, with all the beauty of a soul that sees too much and yet continues to choose what is real, is perhaps the soul that the universe is least able to leave unanswered. There's a possibility you haven't considered yet. That person who seems to be ignoring you, who has created distance, who has disappeared as if you were something optional in their life. They're not avoiding you, they're trying, and they're not succeeding. There's a huge difference between being forgotten and being someone you can't get out of your head, no matter how hard you try. And Virgo, who analyzes everything with a precision that sometimes impresses and sometimes frightens, rarely uses that same self-perception when she's in pain. Like the video and share it to reach more people.